thank you, and make sure that we're doing the second shir on the 22nd of Tammuz in order that all of us together do a additional shir for Jeff Kaplan as an aliyah for his neshama. And we wish, obviously, long life to Margalit, his wife, and all his children. And may this be an aliyah for his neshama.
Amen.
Kevin, teach us the halacha.
Okay, so continuing with the theme of integrity. Integrity and proper interpersonal behaviors are essential components in the fabric of the mitzvahs, and they are necessary. They are a necessary condition for divine reward. And okay, next paragraph here: comprehensive integrity. According to the Rambam, the command to be yashar is an all-encompassing ethical principle which requires one to go beyond the letter of the law. He explains this principle in his comment to Devarim, chapter 6, verse 18. You shall do what is fair and good. Our sages have a beautiful interpretation for this. It refers to compromise and going beyond the letter of the law, since it is impossible to specify in the Torah all the possible scenarios of a person's interactions with his neighbors and friends. So after the Torah mentioned many of them, for example, you shall not be a gossip mongerer, that's from Vayikra, you shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge. You shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed, and similar ordinances. This verse reiterates a general principle that a person should do what is good and right in all matters, including compromise and going beyond the letter of the law. And one's speech should be pleasant with people until he will be esteemed by all as a wholesome, upright person in all matters. And it comes from Yuma. And lastly, as customs and social norms vary from one place to another, and as each situation is unique and not specified by Torah law, one must adjust and modulate his behavior such that people will deem him a person of integrity and upright in all matters.
Good. Thank you, Kev. All right, guys. We on the 79th daf, making good progress. So, as you know, the Torah prescribes the twofold, fourfold, and fivefold payment only for a thief who steals clandestinely, but not for a robber who robs in the open. So, in fact, interestingly enough, the robber doesn't even pay the twofold penalty of the kefil. He only pays the principal back. Whereas a normal thief pays the twofold for all articles, except a sheep at which there's a fourfold payment and an ox at which there's a fivefold. But a robber only pays back the principal. So the Gemara is now going to discuss the two classifications. So Rav Elazar said, if people saw a man hiding in the forest to steal animals pasturing in the vicinity, and then he slaughtered or sold one of the animals, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. Okay? Because obviously if he pays that, he's classified as a thief. Now the question obviously arises that before proceeding to discuss Rav Elazar's main point, the Gemara is basically just trying to sort out a particular difficulty. The Gemara is saying, well, why is he liable? He didn't pull the animal, and therefore he did not perform an act of theft. Meaning, Rav Elazar states only that the man slaughtered or sold the animal, but makes no mention of him stealing it. So that implies that he simply walked over to the animal as it lay in the field and slaughtered it or sold it to somebody without ever moving the animal out of its place. But if so, how can the thief be held liable to the full fivefold payment? He didn't steal the animal. Okay? Because we learned yesterday that this, in order to have a accusation of theft, to take what is not yours, there is an acquiring. In other words, you have to change the domain from the original owner's domain to either the public domain or the thief's domain. So there has to be an acquisition of mashicha, which is pulling the animal. Just like if you want to steal a cell phone out of a cell phone shop, you have to take it and leave with it. You can't wish it disappeared. There has to be an action associated. And here, there was just a slaughter as the animal lays. Well, according to the alternative explanation of the Rambam, Maimonides and Ravad, they understand Rav Elazar to mean that the thief basically drew the branches of the thicket in which he found the animal around the animal to conceal it from view. So he didn't perform the act of stealing, since he didn't pull the animal, and nobody really saw what was going on other than a dead animal or disappearing animal because it was sold. So as far as that's concerned, why is he liable? Because he didn't perform an act, an acquisition, a kinyan of theft. So the Gemara answers, Rav Chisda said, the ruling refers to when the thief stuck the animal with a stick. And what do we mean stuck the animal with a stick? I'm just putting my phone on aeroplane mode. I mean, it won't ever ring at any other time, like when I'm waiting for a client to try and call me. But during a shir, I get emails for Viagra. So, that being said, basically, Rav Chisda said that the ruling refers to where the thief struck the animal with a stick. So, what's the problem with that, guys? Is striking an animal with a stick an acquisition?
No.
It must be in order to take care. It's not pulling and it's not pulling and it's not changing the domain. But I would think that, I don't know about striking the stick. That's a bit tricky. But the one when it comes to slaughter or selling, when you sell, it does change domain. So it moves from there to the new owner. So it will change domain. And then as far as killing it, well, you're putting the animal into a different domain because it's no longer around. That's just thinking very laterally. I'm not sure about the stick. Kevin, I saw you seem to have an answer for that.
Maybe not a stick, but if he touches the animal, maybe touching, but the stick, it's not actually physically, he's not physically touching them, but maybe if he just touches the animal, even though he may not pull it, but the stick probably, I don't think maybe is acceptable.
Okay, so there's a tough... Yeah, Arth, what were you going to ask?
It has to do with the fact that he actually is a gunner because he actually did something in hiding. And the person is not a gunner, which is a word I heard earlier, and I can't remember what it is. When somebody puts on a mask, okay, and he robs you in broad daylight, he's a gunner because he's actually trying to hide himself, hide his face. Is that the reason he went into the bush to hide? Or am I gone ahead again?
No, you've gone ahead and you've gone to a different subject and a different question. Let me just answer Arthur's question, because this was always my question, which I thought Arthur's a very clever question, is that the first thing is that the difference between a robber and a thief is a thief stealthily takes something because he's afraid of people's opinion of him. But he's not afraid of the fact that Hashem's opinion of him is diminished simply because Hashem can see what he's doing. So he's more afraid of people than Hashem. And that's one of the explanations we're going to go through. One of the explanations as to why there's such a heavy penalty for theft as opposed to robbing. Because if somebody's so stupid, they don't fear Hashem and they don't fear people, they clearly treat everybody the same. But if somebody treats Hashem worse, then they treat other people, then Hashem doesn't look kindly on that at all. So Arthur's question becomes relevant because, well, how do we know what's a robber? The whole definition of a robber is if somebody's so brazen he doesn't care about public opinion and therefore takes out a firearm, cocks back the hammer and says, I will be your robber for the evening. I'm very pleased to have shopped at your locale. Can you give me all your jewelry and clothes? But then you know who the person is. But the minute he puts in a mask so you don't know, what's the difference then in concept between a thief and a robber in that regard? In other words, why is then the robber not treated as a thief and still seen as a robber? And that was a question, Arthur, that I've had. Hopefully some of the upcoming Gemaras might deal with that issue. But I think it's a very relevant question. He's not
I'm trying to
behaving.
figure out the stick here. Because what I learned, I think maybe I'm going to head today. Hide acquisition, but I think maybe I'm a bit ahead. I'll give you a briefing what I learned today.
No, I can't. We're running out of time.
Okay.
I'm pleased you went ahead. I did answer your question because I thought it was a great one, but we're running out of time. So basically, any act where you can get an animal to follow you, whether you drag the animal or you give it a motivational lesson by beating it with a stick and it moves quickly, is considered acquisition, even though, Kevin, we haven't learned it thus far. If it gets the animal to move, it's considered acquisition, but it still has to change its position. Gavin, there is no such thing as changing its position when you slaughter or sell it, but not when you steal it. Because the point at which it changes its location, whatever time point that is, that's in essence when you're stealing it, because it's now under your control and your domain, or a domain other than the original owner, let's put it that way. So it doesn't matter at what stage it happens. There's one thing to steal an animal and keep it for a while before you've got a buy and decide to sell it. You decide to shecht it because you know Shabbos is coming up and you want food for the family. But even if it's a spontaneous thing and you just decide to at that point kill it, if you killed it in the original owner's domain and then pulled it, I would wonder if there's a 4 or 5-fold payment, or if there's a 2-fold payment for having stolen meat, if an animal has removed 1 iota, and I'm not sure. Okay, but
what about this? I know I was stretching it when it came to the killing. I was saying that it's in a different domain because it's in heaven now. It's in Shemayim, it's gone. But I know that's a stretch, and I know that wouldn't be included there. But what about the other one? And I understand the stick, that it's like a Kenyan as well. What about the sale? The sale is definitely, if there's a sale, even in that domain, the buyer's going to remove it.
Yeah, but the point of it is then the buyer is still an agent, which means in this case, when it uses the word, he shall pay 5 cattle instead of an ox. That word instead means, in this case, there can be agency through transgression. And here the agent is the buyer, which means the buyer's responsible if he knew it was stolen. But if he didn't know because he thought that this was the thief's property, the thief certainly is responsible, because the term there can be no agents through transgression is not considered in this case because of that superfluous word instead. Further to which there's a juxtaposition between the word between the word slaughter and sold, which means just like a thief as a seller needs a buyer, so to a slaughterer might need an agent. Either way, when you have another party help you in the case of theft, it's not that the agent is only responsible, so is that actual person in this case.
And is it the 5-fold or 4-fold payment? Or
Correct.
Not?
Correct.
And do they share it? Because it becomes an agent, and do they share that?
They only share it if it can be proven that the agent himself knew what was going on. If, for example, the buyer thought that this thief, it was his house, then obviously he's not complicit.
He's off the hook,
Yeah, but if there is some sort of shenanigan going on and it can be proven, but Hashem knows. So even if you get away with it in this world, Hashem knows if there was an agreement with the thief and the person, or if the person was an unwitting, aiding and abetting a criminal. All right, so let's just carry on. So a stick is a great motivational tool, and it's acted like Mashiach in that you acquire the animal when it moves from one domain to another. So the Gemara questions Rav Elazar's main point. But since people saw the man steal the animal, he is not a thief, but a robber, which is heading towards Arthur's point, which we're going to deal with soon. And a robber is not liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. So in other words, the Gemara's understanding at this point is that a thief is defined as someone who is afraid to steal in front of the owner, whereas a robber has no such fear. So accordingly, although a thief certainly had to be seen by two witnesses in order to become liable to the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold penalty, he's still classified as a thief because he made sure not to be seen by the owner himself. The fact that he was a moron and there were other witnesses means he was a moron, but he still wasn't seen by the original owner, and that's what he was afraid of, his public opinion. So in this case, however, the forest is a grazing place for all the city's animals, and the thief could not possibly know to whom the individual animal that he's taking belongs. He doesn't know. So consequently, by taking one of the animals while people, any one of them whom could be the owner of that animal, demonstrates that he's not afraid to be seen by the owner, so he actually should be classified as a robber who's exempt from the 4- or 5-fold payment. That's a discussion with Rashi and Tosfot. So the answer then is, since he hides from them, he's classified as a thief. What do we mean hides from them? It means that although people saw him steal, he was unaware of this, number one. As we said, he's not that bright. And he thought that he was not being observed. But, I mean, there's got to be more to it than that, because Rav Elazar would be telling us the obvious. So, obviously, Rav Elazar meant that the thief was aware that he was being spotted. That's according to Nachalas Moshe. But the main answer is that although the thief realizes he might be under observation by the owner, he still tried to commit his act clandestinely, which means in a hidden manner, as evidenced by the fact that he hides himself in the forest, in the thicket. And therefore, he wasn't that brazen and open about it. He just walked past, made as though he was whistling. The next thing, leaves covered the animal, and then steak for dinner in a separate pick and pay packet. So, you know, that's not the act of a brazen robber. It's the act of a hungry thief. Okay? So, quite clearly, the Gemara asks, well, then I need you to define what is this case of a robber. In other words, we basically want to know, even if he knows that he was being spotted by someone who might be the item's owner, is considered a thief, we want to know what's actually classified as a robber. So Rav Abahu said, someone such as Ben Nayahu, Ben Yehoyada, not so easy. As it is stated, and he robbed the spear from the hand of the Egyptian and slew him with his own spear. So what does this refer to? Is that in the second book of Samuel, chapter 23, verse 21, that's the exact definition of a robber. It's somebody who has no fear whatsoever. And basically, he confronted this guy head on, takes the possessions from the victim's own person, and when he wrestled the spear away from the Egyptian and then stabbed him with his own spear. So the thief in Rav Elazar's case, although he wasn't afraid to be seen by the original owner, was still a little bit nervous. So what did he do? Instead of confronting him directly, putting a gun to him or a knife to his throat and taking the animal, suddenly you heard a rustle in the bushes, and he was seen, the robber, the thief was seen, then he wasn't, the animal was seen, then it wasn't. So it still wasn't as brazen. And that's exactly the point. So someone such as the inhabitants of Shechem, as it's stated, and the inhabitants of Shechem set up ambushes against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed anyone who would pass them on the road. Meaning in the book of Judges, chapter 9, verse 25, they was not scared to confront their victims at all, and they'd rob them of whatever they had in their possession. Okay? So the Gemara asks, and Rav Abahu, who actually cited this verse containing Benayahu ben Yehoyada, why didn't he not say from the verse concerning the inhabitants of Shechem? In other words, why didn't he quote that verse from Judges? Why did he have to use that book of Samuel? Because you would always use in Chumash the earliest time an incident occurred. So Judges as a book in Tanakh occurs before the second book of Samuel. So we're saying, listen, whenever you give over a lesson, you give over the first time it appears. Everybody likes the original, nobody likes the counterfeit or the copy. So the Gemara answers, Rav Abaye would say to you, since the inhabitants of Shechem were hiding in ambush, they weren't technically robbers. Okay? If that's the case, although the verse calls it an act of robbery, as far as having to pay kefil, the double payment, they would be considered thieves. Because it says in Exodus Shmot chapter 22 verse 1, if the thief is discovered while tunneling in, which implies that anyone who hides is considered a thief in regard to kefil. So that's why I never used it as a source. But the Gemara asks, and Rav Yochanan, what would he apply the law as saying they're robbers? What would he say to Rav Abaye? So the Gemara says that Rav Yochanan would say to Rav Abaye, the reason why he uses Judges, which came before the second book of Samuel, is he would say, look, the only reason that they hid in the bushes wasn't out of fear for their victims. It's that they hid there so people should not see them and flee from them. So it was basically called, what do you call it, subterfuge. Or you have a covert operation. When they do a military operation, they do it in order to not be seen and surprise the enemies. So they weren't scared of the conflict. They weren't doing it out of fear. They just knew that if armed people suddenly walk towards people, people kind of hold their cell phone somewhere else. It's a natural response. So they wanted to look pretty relaxed until the point where they had a gun or a knife. So in other words, they were ambushing them in order so that they couldn't escape. So that's not evidence in any way of the fact that they were scared. They weren't scared at all. Listen, we've got 3 minutes left. I just want to go through quickly. So I just want to give you the reasons. Guys, I want to ask you something. We've got one last Mishnah. We've got a few lines, and then we've got one last Mishnah to read. And this is the last Mishnah in the second book of Bava Kamma. And I wanted to, since it's so opportune for Jeff, I wanted to read that Mishnah to you guys today so you could get a double Mishnah. Can I send another link? Please. I know you've got to go.
Before you do that, I think Arthur, Damon, I think maybe you was explaining Ganef and Gazlan. Is a Ganef a thief or is a Gazlan a thief? Or which one's a robber, which one's a thief?
I'll tell you which one is. A Ganef is somebody who'll do it where it's hidden. Okay? A Gazlan is somebody who'll do it blatantly open. Okay.
Gazlan is a robber and a Ganef is a thief. Exactly right. Arthur knows his Hebrew.
Maybe the word brazen and Gazlan, maybe that's how to remember it.
And another interesting fact, by the way, okay? Only if you're on the owner's land and the animal dies, right, and you, at that time, okay, and you're a thief, you are not responsible only if you've actually managed to lift it off the land. Did you know that? It's called you take possession of it. It's got to be a small animal as well. It can't be like an ox. It's like if you pick up a goat, the moment you pick that goat up, if the animal dies, you are actually the responsible.
Correct. That's what we were hinting to yesterday. Arthur, well done for doing prep with Rabbi Runcan. That's exactly why I'm so impressed that you did the prep, because I assure so long that there's information that gets missing. So with a big animal, you have to have mashicha to draw it in. You can't exactly bench press a cow. Well, you can once, like you can catch a bullet once. But the point of it is that a smaller animal, if you lift it up, I did say, like, if you lift up a smaller animal, that's an acquisition, even if it's on the original owner's land. And that's actually the very case that Arthur's talking about. There is a way to do it on the original land. There can be a different form of acquisition. And that's why yesterday I was talking about movables compared to non-movables, star, witnesses, changing of money, guarantees, etc. That's exactly why we mentioned it. Arthur, I'm so proud of you that you did that. I'm going to send a new link now. Well done, mate. So, guys, basically, this is where we're going to learn the famous reason from. Is that the Gemara cites a brisa that explains why the Torah prescribed the twofold, fourfold, and fivefold payment for a thief and not for a robber. The students of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai asked him, why was the Torah more stringent with a thief than with a robber? He said to them, the robber equated the honor of the servant to the honor of his master, whereas the thief did not equate the honor of the servant to the honor of the master. Okay? I'm obviously going to explain to you what that means. He made as if it were the eye of one's below, as though it does not see, and the ear of one's below, as though it does not hear. Now, when the Torah says the eye of the one below and the eye of the one above, it's actually a euphemism for the opposite. Because if somebody says one curses the name of, you don't want to say of the one, you want to use the opposite term, because whenever there's a negative term in terms of referring to the relationship with Hashem, we don't want to insult Hashem with that. So we use the opposite term. So we say the one below. He insulted the one below, not the one above. Do you get that, guys? It's a way to show respect to Hashem when conveying the concept. So it's saying that the thief is insulting the one below because he thinks the one below can't hear him or see him. What it actually means is the one above, but it doesn't want to ever juxtapose the term insult with Hashem, who's the Most High. That's why it uses the opposite as a euphemism. And it said it accords the honor of one's servant more than the master. So what does that mean, guys? Is that a robber has no fear of man, okay, his victim, or of God. So at least that's a better level, because a thief, however, who steals clandestinely honors man more than God, for he takes precautions not to be seen by his victim, but he is not afraid to be seen by God. The thief, since he fears human judgment but not heavenly retribution, denies the basic tenets of Judaism that God is aware of man's actions and that he rewards and punishes for them. The robber, on the other hand, is pretty stupid. He doesn't necessarily deny this, because every punishment by humans which he observes from his own eyes doesn't deter him. He may feel that what he stands to gain immediately by robbing outweighs the loss of punishment in the future, both at the hands of the earthly court and by God. So his sin is not as severe as the thief's, because somebody that does that is basically slightly pathological. I can tell you that much. So therefore, it says it's not an insult to God. The guy's generally just not very bright. Okay. So as it was stated, woe to those who hide in depths to conceal counsel from Hashem. Their deeds are done in darkness. And they say, who sees us and who knows us? And it is written, and they say, God will not see, nor will the God of Jacob understand. And it is written, and for they said, Hashem has forsaken the land, and Hashem does not see. So basically, all of this comes from Isaiah, the 29th chapter and the 15th chapter, and then in Psalms, chapter 94, verse 7. Okay? And basically, they plot in secret to steal and do evil, and the same in the source of Ezekiel, chapter 9, verse 9. So the thing of it is, those people are just deniers. Now, Rabbi Meir says they illustrated the difference with the parable between a thief and a robber in the name of Rabban Gamliel. So what is this matter similar? If there are two people, guys, that were in a city and they both made a feast, one invited the townsfolk but did not invite the king's sons. In other words, he invited the whole town except the king's sons. But the other one invited neither the townsfolk nor the king's sons. Which one's punishment would be greater? Obviously, the one who invited the townsfolk but did not invite the king's sons, because he treated the king's sons worse than he treated the townsfolk, whereas the other person treated them all equally badly and excluded them. So the punishment of a thief who has less fear of God than man is greater than that of a robber who has no fear of either. That's the analogy. So the Brisa comments on the fact that the penalty for slaughtering or selling an ox is fivefold, whereas the penalty for slaughtering and selling a sheep is only fourfold. Now, guys, there's two reasons for it. Listen carefully. Now, the first one you know, but the other one you don't. So Rabbi Meir says, come and see how great is the power of labor. For stealing and slaughtering or selling an ox, which the thief caused to desist from its work, because an ox does farm work, pays the thief pays fivefold. But for stealing and slaughtering or selling a sheep, which doesn't do any work, guys, it's food, okay? He pays only fourfold. So the animal is given a higher payment because you're depriving the original owner of a working animal, not just of food. So therefore, it's a bigger penalty. So that was a very interesting explanation. I never knew that. Another explanation, which you do know, guys, more famous, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, come and see how great is human dignity. For stealing and slaughtering or selling an ox which walked after the thief on its own feet, he pays fivefold. But for stealing and slaughtering or selling a sheep which the thief had to carry astride from his shoulders, he pays only fourfold. So what we are basically saying is that when the thief steals a sheep, he must carry it on his shoulders. It's humiliating, it's smelly. So therefore, the Torah feels a little bit more lenience towards him with regards to the payment. Now, interestingly, this is a completely different opinion now. Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim states his own reason for the law that the thief pays double and the robber does not. And the law that the thief pays double is that the slaughter or sale of an ox carries a greater penalty than that of a sheep. And he based his explanation on the principle, which he himself innovated, that the more common a transgression, the greater the penalty the Torah imposes in order to act as a deterrent of that transgression. So if you take a robber, it's pretty unlikely, guys, that somebody without a mask, as Arthur quite rightly said, would turn around and brazenly rob from somebody, because that person would be taken to court. Now that answers Arthur's question, according to this opinion, that would a guy be a robber if he conceals his face? Probably not, Arthur. He might be treated as a thief. So if he's that brazen, it's uncommon. And therefore you only have to pay back the principal, because most likely you can identify the person and get your money back. But a thief who's difficult to identify is much more common than a robber, and therefore there's the 2, 4, or 5-fold payment. That's exactly why there's at least a careful double payment, right? And then if you want to know why stealing a sheep is got a 4-fold payment, is it's quite common to steal sheep compared to other items, because they found out in the fields compared to somebody's private house. So Kevin, it's not as risky. If you're stealing a sheep, you see it grazing, you go and take it. Kevin, you working on something else?
Just scratching something on my leg. I'm listening.
Okay.
Because the sheep's also lighter. It's lightweight also. It's easier than the ox, isn't it?
It's not about that. It's about you can't. If you break into somebody's house, you're liable to get shot. If you go into the field and you steal an animal, unless there's a shepherd, you're not going to be viewed all the time. So your probability of getting away with it is higher. Therefore, it's a 4-fold penalty, whereas stealing normal household items is a 2-fold penalty because it's more risky. So therefore, it's more common to steal sheep. Now, as far as oxen are concerned, oxen don't have shepherds, and therefore it's even more common to steal an ox. So therefore, that's the highest penalty given for stealing something the most common, and it's meant as a deterrent. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
And then it's a pretty much a deterrent, the fact that the animal is slaughtered or sold, because what are you going to do? Look at the animal all day. You're going to eat it at a certain point, yes? I would reckon. Are you going to sell it and make a quick buck? Probably, because where are you going to hide the cow? And people's cows were branded. It would be recognized. So it would be very common to turn it into cash flow or food. So therefore, that's when the 4 or 5-fold payment kicks in, because of the commonality, and again, a deterrent. Now, I'm just going to share the Mishnah on the screen, and I would like Arthur to read it in the schus of him having prepared with Rabbi Cohn, who's on a much higher madriga than me, and I'm feeling absolutely happy, Arthur, that you did that. Really, really happy. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and Arthur's going to read it, and then, guys, we are done. We are done. Give me a second.
Then I want to ask you a question after that, Damon.
Sure.
Okay. I'll move your picture out the way, yeah? Hold on, just want to get back to
Okay, just read it clearly, because it's
I'm
an
just trying to
American
see it.
Jeff Kaplan also.
Yeah, I need to see it first.
Arthur's on his cell phone, so just give him a few minutes to take a look.
Okay. Mishnah. The Tanna concludes chapter 7 with a Mishnah that prohibits the raising of various animals in specific places. The first of these rabbinic strictures is designed to prevent one person's animal from grazing in another's field. We may not raise small domesticated animals, therefore sheep or goats, in the land of Israel, but we may raise them in Syria and in the wilderness areas of the land of Israel. We may not raise chickens in Jerusalem on account of the consecrated meat that is eaten there. And the Kohanim may not raise chickens in all the land of Israel on account of the utility of pure foods, teruma, okay, that they receive the gifts of which they eat. We may not raise swine in any place. A person may not raise a pig unless it is bound with a chain. The Mishnah concludes with a rabbinic stricture of a different nature. We may not spread nets for capturing wild doves unless the net is 30 rows distance from the settled area.
Excellent, Arthur. So for Jeff Kaplan, to have the schus of having two Mishnayot, obviously Hashem orchestrated that, and is indicative of what a amazing human being he is. Now, by the way, guys, I want you to replace the word strictures with restrictions. The first of these rabbinic restrictions, okay, don't read the word strictures. Just thought I'd let you know. And the word consecrated takes concentration. All right, Kevin.
Remember, the HT is a silent RE before it.
Cheat, man. Kev, what's your question?
You were saying that it's a 5-fold penalty for the ox.
Yeah.
As a deterrent, but it's also why shouldn't the 4-fold also be for the sheep?
Okay, well, there are 3 reasons. The first reason is that when you steal an ox, you take it out with dignity, because you can't bench press an ox and put it
too heavy. Okay.
And therefore, if somebody steals a sheep and they go through a lot of humiliation and smelliness and a backache and a physio and everything else, that is some sort of mercy for them, that they only pay 4-fold instead of 5-fold, whereas an ox can be led out with dignity. Your second reason is that the ox stealing is more common than a sheep, because sheep usually has shepherds looking after them. So it's easier to get away with a stolen ox, because you're not, like, why would you carry it over your neck? I mean, you're just walking it out with dignity. Somebody could think it was yours. So because of the commonness, it tends to incur a bigger penalty, because there's no shepherd. It's the easiest thing to steal, and therefore it has the greatest.
But in the Tanakh, everyone, they used to carry a lost sheep. The shepherd used to carry it like that on the shoulders to get it and put it back, take it back to the flock, reunited with the flock. Anyway,
I agree.
That's a general way. So maybe they could think, but they could think that the thief is actually the shepherd. Unless the shepherd...
Exactly. That's why there's still a fourfold payment for stealing a sheep. They could think he's a shepherd, but the fact of it is, it's not for the faint-hearted. If you've ever smelt a sheep close up, I smelt it wasn't a walrus. What was it? I think it was a
seal.
A seal or something on the beach. I'm telling you, that thing honked. You couldn't go within 2 meters of that rancid, rotting flesh. And even when it's alive, sheep don't smell so good. So to get your whole body with that, you're going to need a shower before having a little bit of intimacy with your missus, I promise you. All we're saying is that sort of embarrassment and that humiliation. If somebody's not used to doing it, they feel it's embarrassing. Like, for example, if you're used to begging at the robots, it's not embarrassing. If a person is put in that financial position in the beginning, it's very humiliating. It's exactly the same thing. And you know what, Arthur, Rabbi Cohen he's got a great sense of humor when he gives the shiur. He goes at a lovely speed, and he's very funny, and he's clear. Hey? He's super, super clear.
I like the meat and potato method. He's like really direct. He explains it fast. You know.
Yeah. So he's good for